Defining infinite conception. What is infinite conception? Infinite conception is the idea that all life is one. Infinite conception would explain our births, our deaths, our creations, our apocalypses, our eternal afterlives, our reincarnations, and much more about human civilization. It explains them quite clearly. They are essentially all human illusions. Do not expect your mind to accept or even comprehend the concept of infinite conception. For starters, infinity itself a concept almost impossible to process. To try to relate infinity to your life, then human life, and then all life will boggle your mind. Infinite conception ultimately would make individuality an illusion. But how can we be certain that this is the actual reality that exists outside of our human perception of reality? Even if it could be proven, infinite conception would still remain the ultimate paradox. While it is probably the reality we spend our entire birth-to-death cycle denying and attempting to escape, the paradox is that even if we were able to prove it, we would still be required to deny it. Regardless of what we believe, or what methods we use to escape reality, infinite conception would mean that we continue onward as one mass in an infinite loop. To understand what you are about to read, you have to be aware of the four core components of the human condition. Denial, escape from reality. Self-deception, deceiving oneself using illusions. Self-hatred. Self-love, self-worship and narcissism. That said, what parallels the idea that all life is one? Let's first list the basic parallels of infinite conception, which include the Abilene paradox, when a group of people collectively decide on a course of action even though none of the individuals would have chosen that particular course. Anonymous, a loosely associated hacktivist group with no real leadership. Collective effervescence, the perceived energy formed when a large group of people gather together, causing them to behave differently than how they behave in ordinary life. Collective intelligence, group intelligence that emerges from collaboration and competition. Collective unconsciousness, coined by Carl Jung, it is an organization of individual experiences of the members of a certain species. Communal reinforcement, where a conspire or idea is repeated and asserted within a community, making that concept or idea common knowledge. Crowd psychology, when individuals gather together and gain power through forming a group rather than acting individually. The Gaia hypothesis, the idea that all organisms and their inorganic surrounding on Earth are closely integrated. Global brain, a metaphor for the worldwide intelligent network formed by all the people of this planet together with the information and communication technologies that connect them, internet, etc. Group behavior, when individuals group together and find themselves acting in a similar way. Higher consciousness, the state of mind of an individual who has become aware of actual reality. Human spirit, the spiritual or mental part of humanity, illustrated as singular. Noosphere, the spirit of human thought. Peer pressure, the influence exerted by a peer group on an individual. individuals seem to be more or less influenced by it. Reality tunnel. Reality is formed from beliefs and experiences of an individual, forming a different interpretation of the world around them. Social representations, values, beliefs, ideas and practices that are shared among members of groups and communities. Superorganism, one organism consisting of many organisms. Zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, or age. Again, on their own, each of these items can be debated. Each have been studied and each are complicated. It is only when they are unified together when you can start to paint the picture that, quite simply, all life is one. Now that we know the parallels of infinite conception, let's list what infinite conception would explain. It would explain why we love others when we love ourselves, manifested from self-love. Why we hate others when we hate ourselves, manifested from self-hatred. Why the fundamental parts of human history over the last 5,000 years have repeated themselves over and over. Why we as human beings exist in an infinite cycle of self-deception and denial throughout of our lives, we are required to. Why we found that all human DNA is 99.9% identical throughout the entire human population, and 98.4% identical to a bonobo. Why human cultures tend to worship children. Why human cultures tend to neglect the old. Why we created a one and only God in our mirror image whose one and only people we are to be, manifested from self-worship. Why we have a love/hate relationship with this God, manifested from self-love and self-hatred. Why our pasts seem to align with our futures. Why our futures seem to align with our pasts. Why organized religions create and perpetuate our dominant beliefs on life, self-deception. Why social problems, on both the macro and micro level, can be explained and deconstructed. Take the simple problems of homicide and war, self-hatred, and the reality that the behavior of large corporations fit the textbook psychological criteria for psychopathy. Why a human being can just as easily believe Christianity as they could Scientology, self-deception. The doctrine itself is unimportant. The psychology behind all belief is universally self-deception. Why our illusion of individuality takes on certain behavioral traits of parents, relatives, friends, acquaintances, actors, heroes and anyone that individual was surrounded by as a child. Why our pattern of behavior norms and cultural norms are both universal, and generally irreversible. Why individuals take on the culture, religion, mindsets and traditions of their parents and surroundings. Why every civilization will rise as they all will eventually fall. Why no idea human beings create has ever stood the test of time, not a language, not a religion, not even an empire. Why the only idea that seems to be universal is all life is one, which has resonant throughout the ages in creation myths, religions, philosophies and artistic expressions. DNA and RNA are paralleled in all living organisms, and why all living organisms adapt to their environment and why evolutionary mutations self-replicate. Why the building blocks of life self-replicate, they are neither born nor do they die. Why psychedelic and psychotropic drugs such as DMT, dimethyltryptamine, and mescaline have universal perspective-altering effects on the human mind. Why DMT is found widespread throughout the plant kingdom, and why DMT will probably be found in trace amounts in all living organisms on Earth, the science continues today. Why DMT may be produced in the human pineal gland, the significance this discovery would be for infinite conception. Why in 1985 we were able to put a baboon's heart into a human baby and why that baby was still able to live. Baby Faye. Why cultures, ideas, religions, traditions, customs, hit songs and viral videos spread via proximity. Why both men and women both possess varying degrees of masculine and feminine traits, the individual is only 50% human. Why pets align to human personalities in proximity. Why the female menstrual cycle becomes aligned when women are in proximity with one another. Why time is distorted during sleep and hypnosis. Why déjà vu and other phenomena are universal to the human condition. Why there is a startling interconnection phenomena experienced by identical twins. Why individuals are acutely similar to their parents and grandparents and even total strangers. Why two total strangers can look and appear familiar to each other even though they have never met, law of attraction. Why active holy sites, where millions have traveled to in the past, often seem familiar to an individual who first travels there. Try it. Why an individual can recall looking through the eyes of another, or experiencing the consciousness of another, when dreaming. Why there are subtle connections between sex and death. Why there are subtle connections between sleep and hypnosis and time distortion. Why there are subtle connections between physiology and psychology. Why there are subtle connections between cosmology, atomic theory and organic chemistry. Why there are subtle connections between the human condition and reported paranormal phenomena. Why there are subtle parallels that create a balance between modern monotheism and reincarnation-based religions. Western monotheism parallels a singular God, while Eastern reincarnation parallels multiple lives. Unified together is one life, infinitely. Why the breakdown of an atom closely parallels the breakdown of the solar system. Why the living cell of an organism closely parallels the function of the combustion engine. Why the behavior of a corporation closely parallels the behavior of a human sociopath and the reason for this manifestation. Why the Internet closely parallels the singular interconnected consciousness of all life on Earth. Why writers, musicians, and artists have an innate ability called flow, seemingly a direct link into the subconscious, or superconscious. Why the work of certain artistic talented individuals hits a nerve aka, becomes popular. Why there are three primary basic human motivations, the motivation to work, the motivation to create art, and the motivation to survive. Why there is required to be a balance and the reason we are inclined towards one or the others. Why we possess a motivation to work and what this motivation represents. Why we possess a motivation to create artistic expressions and what this motivation represents, writing to ourselves. Why we possess survival and reproduction motivations and what these motivations represent. Why books, songs, works of film and works of art that parallel the human condition tend to be the most viral. Why we believe in karma, destiny, astrology and psychic connections and what they parallel. Why hypnosis exists, how it works, why it can work psychologically and has worked medically. Why we have a tendency to worship celebrities, sports figures, musicians, artists and war heroes. Why the above individuals and the talented often lead tragic personal lives. Why we have a higher likelihood of substance abuse and suicide when we fulfill our dreams and or become famous. Why the fulfillment of dreams often becomes an individual's nightmare. Why we have a tendency to neglect the billions of starving and worship corrupt individuals who drive for money, useless material possessions and power over others. Why mass movements form, what they represent, why they rise, and why they fade. Why individuals who are randomly born with unique talents and unique skills, with no logical explanation or source. Again, on their own, none of these things really prove anything. It is only when they are unified together when the picture can be painted. One of the most difficult concepts to keep in mind is that self-deception still exists at the core of the human condition. The ability to deceive yourself, which was taught to yourself as a child, is one of your most precious talents you fiercely guard. Self-deception is what truly sets the human condition apart from the perception of reality that all other living things seem to have. In other words, animals seem to completely lack the capacity for self-deception, but in humans self-deception is boundless. This is the reason you may not be able to conceive reality. The bottom line regarding self-deception is that the human condition can and will believe anything taught to it as a child. These teachings to create a traditional mindset that takes place in an alternative reality that does not actually exist outside of the mind. As discussed in other articles, self-deception is not only at the core of the human condition, it is also one of the ultimate parallels of infinite conception. It would be a paradox that the human mind must deceive itself regarding its individuality merely to remain sane and continue to operate within an artificial civilization. Quite a hilarious paradox, if you consider it. If this does not make much sense to you, I will explain it to you another way. You are caught in an infinite loop. You are required to deceive yourself constantly so you do not become aware of the reality that you are caught in an infinite loop. The human condition exists within an infinite cycle of self-deception so that you do not become aware of reality. Deceiving yourself that you are an individual is the only way to remain operational within an artificial human society. Without this self-deception, you will no longer ride the rails that human civilization has laid down for you. You will see clearly that it is all an illusion. In other words, aware of the singularity of life, human civilization is rendered transparent. You may find this last point interesting. In the West, it is generally believed that consciousness occurs in the human brain. In the East, it is generally believed that the human brain is merely monitoring a master consciousness. Ponder on this long enough, parallel to the idea of infinite conception, and you will understand another paradox.